What victim ended up being the bad guy after more information came out? Mick Philpott. He wanted to show that his ex was violent and dangerous to their children, and he wanted to play the hero. He devised a plan to set a light to his family home, and he would rescue the children. Unfortunately, the fire took hold faster than he anticipated, and all 6 of his children died. He then played the victim on TV shows and news, until they discovered that he set the fire. Karen Matthews faked her daughter's kidnapping. Not long after, Madeleine McCann went missing, so that she could get money. She hid her inside a bed at a friend's house, and planned to collect the reward money. People actually felt sorry for her, thinking her daughter was missing, and it was a huge police investigation. Ended up in jail for kidnapping, perverting the course of justice, and false imprisonment. Dave Krupa had been dating casually after his 12-year relationship ended, and ended up meeting a woman named Carrie Farver. They hit it off instantly, and spent a lot of time together over the next few weeks. This was until Carrie texted Dave at work, and asked if they could move in together. This was a shock to Dave, and he said, no. Carrie then sent a super nasty response, and basically told him to F off. Dave then started getting bombarded with texts and emails from Carrie. The harassment, already relentless and almost daily, started to expand to include other people in Dave's life, like his recent ex, girlfriend, Liz Golyar. Liz became a constant target of Carrie's stalking and harassment. Things escalated. At one point, Liz's house burned down. I suggest looking up this case for the full details, because there's so much more to this story. As it turned out, Liz had killed Carrie, ostensibly out of jealousy of Carrie's quickly growing relationship with Dave. Liz then began impersonating Carrie, and sending messages, pretending to be Carrie. That's right, Liz was the one behind all those messages. The whole story is absolutely wild. I suggest checking out the book, A Tangled Web, by Leslie Rule, for the full story. It's absolutely nuts. In 1864, a train pulled into London, carrying a bloodied unconscious man, Franz Mola. Police were alerted, and when the man came to Mola, told them, as they were riding, 2 men approached him, and tried to rob him. However, Mr. Muller fought back, was shot, and then left behind, as the robbers jumped off the train. What actually happened was, Franz Mola attacked a Mr. Thomas Briggs, a 69-year-old banker, and robbed him of his gold chain and pocket watch. Later in the day, Mr. Briggs would be found unconscious, lying on the tracks, because Mola shot him, and threw Briggs off the train. Briggs would soon pass away from his injuries. Police were super suspicious, and then a pawn shop owner came forward, identifying Mola as selling him Briggs' gold chain. London police issued a warrant. However, Muller had already fled the hospital, and boarded a sail ship for New York. Scotland Yard inspectors took a steamship to New York, beating Muller by weeks. They, and an entire crowd of people, were waiting at the docks when Muller arrived. And that's the story of the first murder on a train. There's a cool book about it, Mr. Briggs' Hat. Corey Harris. He's the guy who went viral earlier this year for showing up at a Zoom court hearing driving while on suspended license. He spent 2 days in jail. Then it was reported that Harris should have had his license reinstated 2 years prior. Harris' attorney sets up interviews with local TV stations, stating his innocence. Good Morning America does a piece on Harris, and lectures the viewer to not judge a book by its cover. Harris goes back to court, the judge does his homework, and discovers Harris has never had a license in Michigan, or any other state, yet has been to Secretary of State office multiple times to renew his ID. The opportunity was there for him to get a license, he chose not to. He goes viral again. But because he lied and embarrassed so many people along the way. Brittany Norwood, a former soccer star that worked at a Lululemon athletic clothing store in an upscale wealthy neighborhood. She had worked the night shift with her manager, and both were the victim of a brutal robbery and murder. A co-worker arrived at the Lululemon store the next morning, discovered the scene, and contacted the police. The manager, Jana Murray, was brutally murdered and stabbed over 60+ times. Norwood suffered minimal injuries, her pants ripped, and she was tied up. Norwood claimed an African-American man first killed Murray, then approached Norwood, ripped her pants apart, and raped her. The police initially believed Norwood's story, and sent her home. During the investigation, the police came across text messages of manager Jana Murray, discovering Norwood had been stealing merchandise, and she was going to confront her about the theft, then fire her. The police soon made Norwood a suspect, especially after discovering Murray's car, with Norwood's blood inside, was parked 3 blocks away from the store. Norwood claimed the robber told her to move the car, then walk back to the store, or they will kill her. The police believed this was absurd. She would be allowed to leave, then return after being allowed to leave. She was arrested, charged with murder, convicted, and sentenced to life without parole. It was later revealed at her trial, the entire murder was overheard by several people, who did not intervene. An Apple Store employee overheard women fighting, and assumed it was just drama. I just listened to a podcast about a girl, Mackenzie Sharilla. Basically she, her boyfriend, and another friend, were involved in a crash that killed the boyfriend and the friend. She was the driver, and she survived. At first, it seemed like maybe there was some fault in the car, or that she simply lost control of the vehicle, but as the investigation went on, they realized she planned the crash and ran into that wall on purpose. It was a crazy listen. Edit. Since a lot of you are asking, I listened to it on the Sword and Scale podcast, episode 274. Carla Leanne Homolka, the Barbie, in the Barbie and Ken Killers. She was thought of as the victim of Paul Bernato's abuse, being forced into participating in his rapes and murders. This included the one where Paul raped and accidentally murdered her younger sister, Tammy Homolka. She went to the police to report Paul after a particularly bad beating from him that left her in hospital. She was given a plea deal, and her lawyer covered up the tape recordings that showed her willingly participating in the rapes and murders. Once this information was let out, it was too late. The plea deal was made, Paul was arrested, and is still in prison, and she got out, and now is working around children in a school. I effing hate that nasty bitch. She was abused by him, yeah, but it disgusts me that she willingly participated in the murders and rapes. Oh, and she married the brother of the lawyer who represented her. She's able to live a normal life, whereas the 3 teenagers she helped kill never got to start theirs. Since her release from prison, she's changed her name a few times. A common surname she uses is Teal. Paul Teal was Bernardo's AKA throughout their relationship. She has not moved on or been reformed. She still wants to maintain a connection to the man with whom she raped and murdered teenage girls, including her own sister. Susan Smith. She was all over the news, begging for the return of her 2 boys, who were toddlers, stating she had been carjacked. After several days, it was discovered that she had let her car roll into a lake, with her baby strapped into their car seats. I'll never forget hearing it on the radio, driving home from work. My children were their age at the time, and I had to pull off the road, because I couldn't see through the tears. Was she the one who said a big black man stole her car and kids? If so, I remember the investigator saying, in an interview on Forensic Files, that he asked if the man tried to sexually assault her, and she laughed and said, "Oh, no, nothing like that," and he commented that it was a weird and inappropriate reaction. I used to install security cameras as a side job. I was asked to help out a lady going through a horrible divorce. Her soon-to-be ex-husband was sending her threatening text messages from burner phones. He was coming by all hours of the night and breaking windows, and a few times attempted to set their house on fire. A friend of hers reached out to me and explained the situation and asked if I could help her in any way. I purchased cameras and an NVR and went over one night in February and installed the whole system, wires and all. I never felt scared during any of my installations, some of which were in really bad neighborhoods, but this psycho had me worried, so I did this job, armed. After finishing up, I showed her how the system works, and told her to call me if she ever needed anything else. A couple weeks later, I get a call from a fire investigator, asking me for help in recovering video. He told me that the guy had returned, broke out a first-floor window, and threw in a Molotov cocktail, causing the first floor of the house to be engulfed in flames. The woman and her 2 daughters were trapped upstairs. The police showed before the fire department, and they had to grab an extension ladder from a neighbor's house and rescue the family through a second-floor window. One of the girls was taken to the hospital for smoke inhalation. I walked the guy through the process of pulling up the video. Once he got to the right time on the camera facing the bathroom window, he said, "The video just goes blank." I told him that I set the video cameras to be super sensitive to movement, so the only way it can go blank is if the camera is removed. or damaged in some way. I directed him to a camera that would cover the area under the camera that goes blank, and he should see someone mess with it. He tells me that nobody ever approached it. I then informed him that the only way that this scenario is possible is if the guy got into the house and disconnected the feed from inside. We concluded our conversation, since he would now need to pour through a lot of video in order to find this man going into the house. About a month passes by, and I am driving to work. I hear the woman's name, who I had been helping, mentioned on the radio during a news segment. I start paying attention, and soon find myself feeling weightless in my chair. It had not been her husband at all. She had been the one doing all these things in order to get her husband arrested and sent to jail. She had bought burner phones to send herself text messages. She had been going out at night and breaking the windows. She had been taking the family out to dinner, excusing herself to go to the restroom, then driving home to break a window and try to set the house on fire before returning to the restaurant. She had been the one to disconnect the camera from inside the house the night that she almost killed her kids in an attempt to frame her husband. I thought I was protecting her from a psycho, but turns out I was helping the psycho. TLDR, I thought I was helping a victim by protecting her from her soon-to-be ex-husband, but she was trying to frame him by risking her kids' lives. McDonald's, I guess, in the hot coffee lawsuit. It's tough describing a massive corporation as a victim, but people were definitely on their side until the details of the lawsuit came out. The coffee was so hot, it fused her labia to her thigh. She had to get surgery to fix the damage that coffee did to her body. McDonald's was only serving coffee that hot because they thought people would be happy to have hot coffee when they got to work, without considering the danger they were putting people in when they got their coffee. She only originally asked for enough money to cover the surgery, and McDonald's offered basically nothing and told her to kick sand. The massive payout was mandated by the court because McDonald's actions during the case were so despicable. Ana Julia Quesada. She was dating a divorced man who had an 8-year-old son. One day, the kid goes missing, and the news started interviewing the parents. She would always stand next to the dad, crying and begging the kidnapper that, if they're watching, to please give back the kid. I remember this very vividly, watching the news. Turns out, there was no kidnapping. She'd killed the kid the very first day of his disappearance, and played her part around her boyfriend and the news. People believe she did it out of jealousy, and in hopes of convincing her boyfriend to move to her country to get over his kid. Her 4-year-old daughter had also died in 1996, in some strange circumstances. Bethany Storrow was the victim of an acid attack that was racially motivated, in Vancouver, Washington. Turns out, she maimed herself trying to commit suicide with acid. She chickened out of drinking it after pouring it on her face. I remember watching an unhinged interview after she was found out. Her reasoning was that all the attention would allow her to tell people about Jesus. Recently, there was this dude in a town in Ontario who filed assault charges on his neighbor for spraying him with a water gun. Her story comes out first to the media, saying how she can't return to work as school support staff until the charges are sorted out, and gives a story about how she was just having a fun water gun fight with the neighbor kids and accidentally sprayed the neighbor while he was mowing his lawn. Week later, his story gets published in the paper. He's repeatedly received targeted harassment for this neighbor and others, he says, likely because he's the one black guy on the street of a small town in an interracial marriage, and releases his security camera footage of him just casually cutting his lawn with the other neighbor, actively telling the kid to bring her the water gun while she's standing behind him, then sprays him directly with it. And the camera also captures the audio of the aftermath, where some racial slurs are dropped, also a recurring thing. What's also funny is that the neighbor claimed that there was some language barrier misunderstanding between them. The guy is straight up Canadian and speaks clearer than most people. Katie Sorensen, the nutjob momfluencer, who claimed a couple was following her through a shopping center, plotting to kidnap her children, supposedly because they were so good looking. Turns out, the other couple were just shopping at the same time, did absolutely nothing wrong at all, and she just wanted attention and more followers. Joe Glenewix, Illinois cop, that staged his suicide to look like he was murdered by assailants. Police and community rallied behind his widow for weeks. Search for the assailants. Funds were collected and donated, tributes were made. Turns out, he committed suicide, because he'd been embezzling money from a police program, and he was about to be found out. Chris Benoit. First off, everybody assumed that someone had killed him, his wife, and his 8-year-old son. Then we discovered it was a double murder-suicide that took place over 2 to 3 days, and that his son was in the house with the body of his dead mom for a period of that time, and the Chris with the bodies of both of them for a while longer. WWE jumped on a memorial episode of Raw the day after the 3 of them were found. A few days later, they had to come clean about what the actual truth was. Judging from shoot interviews with other wrestlers, and the way his brain looked post-mortem, it seems like he had a myriad of issues before the suicide and murders took place. Eddie Guerrero's death most likely contributed to the path he unfortunately went down, as well. Yes, a wrestler called Chris Nowinski started a foundation to investigate CTE, and requested to examine Benoit's brain. His father allowed him to do so. Benoit's brain was described as looking like an 80-something-year-old who suffered with advanced dementia. It was determined that, as a result of the culture in wrestling, Benoit had allowed himself, and been forced, to take multiple blows to the head, mostly from unprotected weapon shots, but also from his use of the diving headbutt as a regular move, and this had left him to basically be psychotic towards the end. Guerrero's death hit Benoit hard. He could see himself going the same route, and again. Due to the culture in wrestling at the time, he had nowhere, he felt, he could ask for help. I want to quickly add that despite my comments may be sounding like I am defending what he did, it is more because he was a favorite of mine, and I have looked into as much information about this as I could find. It is still a horrific crime, and it is good that he is scrubbed from wrestling history, mostly. It interests me to look at the why it happened, too. The Charles Stewart case in Boston, in 1989. Initially, a husband and his pregnant wife, Charles and Carol Stewart, were reported attacked in their car at night, and the wife was killed, and the husband badly injured. A huge police manhunt was on for the killer, alleged to be a black man, by the husband. After much drama, it turned out that it was a carefully staged murder, perpetrated by the husband. Charles Stewart killed himself when he was about to be charged for murder. It's local, Greece, but it has not precedence so far. A woman by the name Elroul is accused of killing all of her 3 children, out of spite and jealousy for her husband. They had an on and off relationship. She became pregnant, they got married. She gave birth to 3 girls. The second daughter was in the early stages of leukemia, but the doctors considered it completely viable. She died unexpectedly, and without any cause related to her condition. At some point, in the same timeline, the first daughter was also admitted at the hospital. 3 years later, the third daughter dies in her crib. SIDS is considered the cause of death. Special tests for hereditary diseases come back negative. The only remaining child, the first daughter, ends up in the hospital once again. While being treated, she goes into some type of a shock. They revive her after trying for 50 minutes. She comes back tetraplegic. You can all imagine how everyone was viewing her. The poor woman, with the unfaithful husband, that lost 2 children, and her last one was left with special needs. That is until her daughter dies, while being at the hospital. Now, all 3 children are gone. The prosecutor gets involved, and everything starts to roll out. How conveniently, a child was either admitted to the hospital, or died, because the husband had left the house, or moved out. Currently, she is incarcerated with a lifetime sentence, convicted of killing her 3 children. In 1961, Captain Julian Harvey was found drifting at sea in a lifeboat, with the lifeless body of a little girl by the name of Renee Duperrault. When he was rescued, he explained that he had been hired by the girl's family to sail them around the Florida Keys for vacation, in a ketchy called the Blue Bell. He went on to explain that, the previous evening, a strong wind caused the main mast to snap and pierce the hull, causing the ship to sink. Worst still, a fire broke out, separating him from the family and the only other crew member, his own wife. He got into the lifeboat, hoping to swing behind and hopefully get through the cabin from behind, but the ship had sunk rapidly, and the other person he was able to recover was the already dead Renee. Truly a tragic story. That was until 3.5 days later, Terry Jo Duperrault, the other daughter of the Duperrault family, was found drifting at sea in a small quart dinghy. She was dehydrated, starving, sunburned like hell, but alive. When she was healthy enough to make a statement, the story she told was very different from Harvey's. She woke up to find her brother and her mother already dead, and when Captain Harvey saw her, shouted at her to go back to her cabin. She did so, cowering under the covers, and says that Harvey was standing at the door of her cabin. She thinks that maybe he was holding his brother's rifle, but she's not completely sure. He eventually left, and when the water started to fill her room, she went up on deck. Harvey got her help to undo the life raft. However, when the rope slipped through her fingers, he dove into the water after it, leaving her on the sinking vessel. She then remembered the cork dinghy and crawled into it. As you can see, her account is very different from Harvey's, and most notable, there never was a fire. Sadly, we'll likely never know the full story, as Harvey would take his own life hours after Terry Jo was found.